15 men on the dead man's chest. Yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest. Yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. The wind was strong and relentless. The schooner cut through huge waves, rising on the crests and dipping into the troughs. Each of its sails billowed and puffed out like the chests of a row of seagulls. The ship's wooden frame creaked and yawned as the sea rocked it back and forth. Its motion, governed by the push of each powerful gust, captured in its sails, and with the whims of the waves that crashed against its bow. Dark clouds rolled overhead. A rumble could be heard in the distance, and a flock of petrels swooped and dove around the ship's masts before disappearing into the misty sky. A wooden barrel rolled from one side of the deck to the other, and then back again, adding a strange percussion to the rest of the ship's cacophony. There were metallic sounds, too. The dull thuds of rusted wrought iron, and the rhythmic clangs of weathered brass fixtures. 3 men stood on the ship's deck. One wore a 3-pointed hat and towered over the others. He was gesticulating in a dramatic manner, first motioning towards the ship's bow, and then to the stern. The other men were shaking their heads, and the slightly more portly one, sporting a black eye patch, raised an angry fist, seemingly in protest. "What you mean we've been had, you great lummox?" he said. "You don't know there ain't no island this far out. Why would there be a trade route here if there ain't no island?" The third man held up a roll of yellowing, torn parchment and handed it to the man with the eye patch, then waved it away, as if he'd wanted it out of his sight. The eye patch man unrolled it and began eagerly pointing at a specific part of it that showed the crude outline of a small landmass. There was a drawing of a giant sea serpent circling the landmass, and various words were scribbled just below. "Thar's been many a merchant vessel along this way. Look at what's written here on the map," he said. The other men squinted their eyes and leaned forward a little, yet to be convinced. The taller one scoffed, and in a deep, booming voice, protested to the others. "No, it says there's a passage yonder, not a trade route. How come we never heard of this island before? Nobody at the Golden Mermaid heard of it, nor anyone in the ports we've stopped in." He paused, and then screwed his face up like he was annoyed, and began gesturing in the direction of the ship's stern again. "We should be going back home." Eye Patch Man put the map down by his side, hacked up a glob of phlegm in the back of his throat, and then spat it onto the deck. "I will slap you silly if you don't stop complaining." He licked his cracked lips, coughed, and pointed at the giant. "Now get back to the galley where you belong and rustle us up summit to eat." The tall man lowered his head, sighed, and plodded off below deck, grumbling to himself as he went. The other man, who had a long gray beard and stood awkwardly, like he had a stone in his right boot, took out a retractable telescope, unfurled it, and put it up to his eye to survey the horizon. "Well?" asked the man with the eye patch. "Seeing anything?" The man with the gray beard didn't respond at first. He slowly panned from left to right and shifted awkwardly when he took small steps to rotate his facing. He tutted under his breath and brought down the spyglass, pushing it closed as he did so. The sails above them made loud, rustling sounds while straining to cope in the vicious winds, and a huge wave crashed against the side of the ship. The whole boat listed to one side, and both men had to shift how they stood to steady themselves as the ship righted itself once again. "What was it that the sailor said? Do you remember exactly?" the gray-bearded man asked as he struggled to find his balance. His voice was that of a well-educated gentleman, but it had the tone of someone who was world-weary, solemn, direct, and tinged with sorrow. Eye Patch Man looked skyward with his one good eye and grimaced while he was trying to think. He was taking too long to respond, so Graybeard answered the question for him. What he said was, "My dear man, that there's an island of untold treasures that isn't marked on any maps. Except this one," Eyepatch Man interrupted, proudly holding up the map in his hand. "Indeed. Except for that one, and if we'd paid him the doubloons he wanted, we might well think we'd been conned," Graybeard said. "Yeah, but we didn't give him no doubloons, did we?" Eyepatch Man asked rhetorically, as he placed his free hand on the hilt of the dagger that he kept tucked into his belt. "We gave him the old fond farewell when he wasn't looking." He made a stabbing motion with an invisible dagger, raised his eyebrows, and with a wry smile on his face, he continued, "Teach him to refuse to aggle. Teach him to not watch his back in a dark alleyway, eh?" He chuckled, and his mouth formed into an off-putting sneer, filled with rotten brown teeth. Graybeard didn't smile, though he did purse his lips and shake his head slightly. "Anyway," he continued, "the point being, why would a man with a map that leads to impossible riches try to sell it for just a few hundred doubloons in some backwater alehouse?" "Dunno," Eyepatch Man responded, as he shrugged his shoulders. There was a brief but familiar look of disappointment on Graybeard's face. He dramatically lifted his hands up to shoulder height, palms upward, and with a troubled timbre to his voice he exclaimed, "Because there is no island. There never was." He kept his arms up in the air, and moved then back and forth in short snaps to emphasize what he was saying. He was a fraud, a swindler, a merchant of falsehoods. He was nothing but a con man. Graybeard put his arms down and shook his head again. He looked defeated. Eyepatch momentarily went to put his hand on his shoulder to comfort him, but suddenly remembered himself, and instead scratched his own stubbly chin. "I don't think he was a con man. I've known plenty of those. The mermaid is full of them, and they learn how to not act nervous in that." Old Sailor Boy looked out of his depth. Eyepatch Man paused for a second, and his voice took on a slightly hushed, serious quality as he went on. "And after I'd shivved him, he really fought me for the map. Clung onto it he did, until all the life went out of him." He held up the map and with an open palm circled his hand over its surface. Why would he cling onto it like that, if he knew it was just some stupid fake? Graybeard looked up with an expression of genuinely being impressed. It was rare for someone other than him to be making such smart observations, and he couldn't help but reveal an approving smile. The moment was bookmarked with light splashes of cold water as rain began to fall, and distant flashes on the horizon were followed by several loud cracks of thunder. "Looks like the storm is here. Best get some rest, Captain," Eyepatch said, with the map rolled up under one arm and holding a small lantern with the other. Eyepatch made his way below deck. Graybeard decided to make one last scan of the horizon with his telescope before heading off moments later. He slowly hobbled to his quarters as the rain began to pour. Once he arrived, he took out an iron key from his vest pocket, unlocked the door, and went inside. After making sure to lock the door behind him, and several limping steps, he made his way to where he kept the trunk filled with his things. A hammock hung above it, which strained and wobbled as he clumsily hauled himself up and into it. Once positioned in suitable comfort on his back, he gently swayed from side to side and relaxed to the sound of the raindrops pit-pattering against the hull of the ship. "This bloody island will be the death of me," he thought to himself, as the world grew soft and dark. In the distance, a faint voice broke through the storm. Someone was shouting, "Land ahoy!" But Graybeard was already snoring heavily by then, and he was utterly oblivious.